Chapter 600. The restaurant is not open for business yet. Please come back later, Mag said without even turning his head when he heard the knocking on the door. Mr. Meg, it's me. There's something I'd like to ask you. Gloria's voice came from outside the door. Miss Gloria. Meg opened the door and was surprised to see Gloria standing outside. I'm so sorry to disturb you so early in the morning, Gloria said apologetically to Meg. Then she raised the blueprints in her hand and said, I have some questions for you about the blueprints. You'll be very busy after the restaurant opens, so I came early. Are you free now? Come in. As a business partner, you can ask me anything. Meg smiled and nodded. He opened the door completely and stepped aside to let Gloria in. Thank you. Gloria's face lit up. The smile on her face made her feel a lot more at ease. She walked into the restaurant with the rabbit in her arms. Miss Gloria, what questions do you have about the blueprints? Are the markings not clear enough for the tailor to make them? Meg gently closed the door and asked Gloria with a smile. Gloria pulled out the blueprints for the 2 dresses from the paper bag, and a blush appeared on her face as she looked at Mag. She bit down on her lower lip, and didn't know how to continue. No, sir, your markings are very accurate, and even a tailor would be able to read them. It's just that these 2 dresses. Meg looked at the off-shoulder dress and the backless dress. He then looked at Gloria's expression and said with a smile, Miss Gloria, do you think these 2 dresses are too revealing and open? No, in my opinion, these 2 dresses are very beautiful. I've never seen such beautiful dresses. But Gloria hurriedly waved her hands, but she was still a little hesitant as she continued. For most women, these 2 dresses would be quite difficult to wear, so there could be some problems with sales. Furthermore, we only have 20 days left before the deadline, so these 3 dresses are our only chance. So you came here today to ask me to modify the blueprints and make these 2 dresses look normal? Meg looked into Gloria's eyes with a calm expression. I respect your opinion, Mr. Meg, but I also have to be responsible to the employees of the Suede Textiles shop. Gloria looked into Meg's eyes with a hint of panic in her heart. Miss Gloria, I really admire your bold and imaginative ideas. Selling ready-to-wear clothes is a forward-looking idea that can change the entire garment industry on the Norland continent. Mag looked at Gloria with a smile, and asked, however, I have to ask you a question now. If you were given 2 identical pieces of clothing, and one of them was tailor-made to fit your figure perfectly in all aspects, while the other was something that you could only choose between a few sizes. Perhaps it would be a little too big, or perhaps it would be a little too small. Which one would you choose? Gloria pondered momentarily before replying, I would choose the dress that fits my body better. Since that's the case, what makes you think that countless people will rush to your door 20 days later to buy all your clothes so that you can survive your losses safely? Mag continued to question her. Gloria's eyes immediately widened as she stared at Meg. I suggest that you make the dress into a premium product. You don't have to make a lot of them, you can only make 4 of each color at most. This dress is targeted at young noble ladies of the same social class as you. They pursue beauty and quality, and price is nothing more than a number to them. Hence, the dress has to be expensive in order to match their temperament. The best way to interest them in this dress is to have someone wear it for them to see. For example, a beautiful young lady could wear a backless dress at a ball, stunning everyone present. That way, all of the women would be curious as to where such a beautiful dress came from, Meg continued. Gloria's eyes lit up even more upon hearing this. As for this off-the-shoulder dress, it's targeted towards the middle class, but the price shouldn't be set too low. It's the kind of dress that middle-class husbands would grit their teeth and buy for their wives. This is a very interesting price range, but it's also very attractive, so you can stock up on it in bulk. There aren't that many gatherings, so they don't have to worry about everyone wearing the same dress sitting at the same gathering. Furthermore, this dress is enough to make them stand out from their peers, Mag continued as he pointed to another dress. Gloria nodded vigorously, and there seemed to be little stars shimmering in her eyes as she looked at Meg. She had thought that Mr. Mag was just a good chef who had a knack for designing clothes, but she didn't expect him to be so clear and logical when he talked about business principles and customer psychological analysis. He had completely overturned her understanding of business. Even Mars hadn't made her feel this way. The only person she could think of was her grandfather, the legend who had redefined Chaos City's business. She could feel that what Meg was saying to her now would have a very profound impact on her in the future. It was as if a door was slowly opening for her. The last chiffon dress is a light luxury dress. It's something that women can buy with their own money, and it can be worn outside or at parties. The price is slightly lower than the previous two dresses, but the quality has to be controlled as well, because clothes of this level will be a very important group of customers in the future. However, there isn't much of a difference between this chiffon dress and the ones that are commonly seen on the market, so the most important thing is the effect of the first two dresses. At times like this, the concept of branding is very important, Mag continued. Brand? Gloria looked at Meg with confusion. A brand is a set of specific features, benefits, and services that the seller provides to the buyer over a long period of time. It's actually a rather abstract concept. When we talk about banks, the first thing that comes to mind is Buffett banks. This is the so-called brand effect, and the benefits of the brand effect are very obvious. More and more people will deposit their money into Buffett banks because of the four words Buffett banks, which brings more profits to Buffett banks. Buffett is the brand of this bank, Mag explained. So what you're saying is that we're going to turn the Suede Textiles shop into a brand, and customers will buy other clothes because of the reputation of the Suede Textiles shop. Even if those clothes aren't all that different from the other clothes on the market, they'll still choose the clothes from the Suede Textiles shop. Is that right? Gloria looked at Meg thoughtfully, and her eyes became brighter. You can think of it that way, but I personally suggest that we remove the last three words. Suede is a very elegant name, and adding textiles shop makes it sound a little rustic. A brand is like a person's face, and the details are just as important. Meg nodded. He was very satisfied with Gloria's ability to understand, but he still needed to think about the details. I understand. Thank you, Mr. Meg. Gloria bowed deeply to Meg, put away the blueprints on the table, and left. Chapter 601. Mammoth's Mid-Autumn Festival Gala was very successful, and it undoubtedly increased the restaurant's popularity. Going to Mammoth's to eat was slowly becoming a common phrase in the middle class, and it had also become a habit for many people. Donna, let's go to Mammoth's for dinner tonight. Look at my skin, hasn't it become fairer and more tender recently? It's all because of Mr. Mac's tofu pudding. Really? Let me see. I can really pinch water out of it. No. Let's go now. How can you only tell me now that you have such a good thing? Do you still have me in your heart? My man has been complaining about my ugly complexion recently. I'm just trying to see if it works first. I'll tell you as soon as I see the results. Let me tell you, as long as you eat this tofu pudding, your complexion will immediately return to your 20-year-old appearance. That stinky man of yours will definitely try to get close to you again. The two noble women held hands and giggled as they boarded a luxurious carriage. Isaac, my dinner party with the guest tonight has been booked at Mammoth's, the middle-aged owner said to his waiter in a furniture store. Boss, that guest has always liked peace and quiet. Mammoth's doesn't have a private room, and we have to line up. I'm afraid it's not very good, the waiter said hesitantly. I know that he likes peace and quiet, but compared to good food, he obviously prefers good food. This order is very important. The new furniture from the store across the street is fancier than ours. Our chances of getting the order aren't very high, so we have to take some risks. The owner shook his head, and a smile quickly appeared on his face. Of course, the risk of eating at Mr. Mac's restaurant is almost negligible. No one can resist that kind of delicious food, even if they have to line up outside. Okay, I'll make the arrangements right away. The waiter nodded thoughtfully and turned to leave. The last time I asked Miss Gina out for dinner, she didn't seem to be very satisfied. She doesn't seem to like barbecue. Do you think I can still ask her out this time? Moreover, what could he ask her to eat that would make her happy? And then fall in love with me? In a pavilion, a young man with short yellow hair looked at a group of young men around his age. He scratched his head and said with some distress. These young people were all dressed rather extravagantly, and it was clear that they came from wealthy families. They were all smiling as they looked at Coney's, and they all began to offer suggestions. If it were up to me, you should just go to Duca's restaurant and book a big private room. With us brothers backing you up, I guarantee that you'll succeed. Come on, Miss Gina's father is a professor at Chaos School. She has a very strict upbringing, and is a gentle and quiet girl. If we show up together, she's going to be so scared that she won't dare to interact with Salter again. But Duca's restaurant is not bad. If you can order the roast pig, she will definitely like it. Duca's restaurant's roast suckling pig has been reserved for 2 months. By then, it would be too late. Didn't they open a new fish shop a few days ago? I've tasted it, and it tastes good. Maybe Miss Gina will like it. Yeah. Miss Gina mentioned that fish is her favorite food. Can you tell me where that fish shop is? Coney's asked with an elated expression. You guys know nothing about the food in the Aiden Square, and you don't even know how to date a girl. A young man with brown curly hair pursed his lips. Harry Potter, do you have a better recommendation? Coney's turned to him with an expectant look in his eyes. It's very awkward to eat fish on a date when you're not in a relationship yet. Miss Gina eats very slowly, and if she comes across a small fish bone, will she reach out to grab it or swallow it? No matter what she does, she definitely won't go on a date with you again, Harry Potter said with a serious expression. Gasp. Everyone drew a sharp breath, and Coney's expression also changed upon hearing this. The mere thought of how awkward that would be, and he immediately gave up. Of course, if you insist on eating fish, then you have to choose a fish without any small fish bones. That way, you can satisfy Miss Gina's love of fish, and avoid the awkward situation that I mentioned earlier, Harry Potter continued. A fish without any small fish bones? How could there be such a fish in this world? Coney's was even more dejected. Harry Potter, you're just spouting nonsense. Everyone rolled their eyes in unison. They had thought that Harry Potter would be able to provide some useful information, but it turned out that he didn't say anything at all. That's why I said you guys know nothing about the food in the Aiden Square. Amy's spicy grilled fish is grilled with fish without any small fish bones, and it's countless times more delicious than the fish shop you just mentioned. If Miss Gina agrees to your invitation, then you should be able to win her heart with this delicious grilled fish, Harry Potter said with a smile. The unknown little restaurant had already begun to integrate itself into the lives of the residents of Chaos City through word of mouth, and it was still expanding its influence. Father, I'm going to class now. Amy put her little wand into her pocket and waved at Meg before leaving the classroom. Today was Julian's class, so Meg didn't have to accompany her to school. Be careful. Meg smiled as he turned to Sally and Yarbemia, who were busy cleaning up the table, and said, Aisha, MIA, I plan to hire 2 more employees. Sally and Yarbemia both stopped what they were doing and turned to Meg in unison. Boss, is it because MIA didn't do a good job? If I did something wrong, you can tell me, and I'll definitely do a better job. Yarbemia turned to Meg with a nervous expression. Sally was also looking at Meg with a perplexed expression. More and more customers had been coming to the restaurant recently, but with the current size of the restaurant and Meg's cooking speed, she and Yarbemia were still able to handle it. It's not like that. MIA, you and Aisha are both doing very well. I've never seen anyone do a better job than the 2 of you. I'm not hiring employees because you're not doing a good job. I'm planning to open another branch, so I need more employees, Meg explained with a smile. It appeared that both of them had misunderstood his intentions. Open a branch? Yarbemia and Sally were both surprised to hear this. Chapter 602. Meg shook his head and replied, yes, but I'm not going to open Mammoth. Instead, I'm going to open an ice cream shop that specializes in ice cream. Yarbemia faltered momentarily before turning to Meg with a hesitant expression, and asked, You're only going to sell ice cream? Yes, I'm only going to sell ice cream. Meg nodded in a firm manner before turning to Yarbemia with a smile, and said, On top of that, I'm planning to make you the store manager of the ice cream shop, MIA. You'll be responsible for the operation of the shop. A panicked look appeared on Yarbemia's face as she hurriedly waved her hands through the air. Even her voice was trembling slightly as she said, I can't do that. Boss, I can't be the store manager. She was already very satisfied to be able to work as a waitress. With her status, she could only work in a dark corner, but she was now able to provide sincere service to customers every day, and that made her very happy. However, Meg was going to make her the store manager of an ice cream shop. This was simply too big of a task for her. She couldn't imagine what kind of uproar a half-dragon would cause if she were to become the store manager of a restaurant in the Aden Square. She was someone who hadn't even been allowed to enter the front hall of a restaurant. Who says you can't do that? If I say you can, then you can. Meg turned to Yarbemia with a warm expression, and sincerely said, "This is not an order, it's an invitation. As the owner of Mammoth, I'm officially inviting you to become the store manager of the ice cream shop, young Mistress Yarbemia. In Chaos City, there's no third person who knows how to operate an ice cream machine, so you're the best and only choice." Yarbemia looked into Meg's eyes, and he calmed down slightly. However, there was still a conflicted look on his face, and he shook his head as he said, "I think Aisha is more suitable for the role than I am. She's so smart and beautiful, so she'll definitely be able to pick it up quickly. Also, many customers will definitely buy ice cream for her, so she's more suitable to be the store manager. I can't even use a dishwasher properly, let alone an ice cream machine that's even more complicated. If you want me to make 2 snowballs, that's not a problem, but if you want me to make delicious ice cream, then I definitely won't be as good as you." Sally looked at Yarbemia with a serious expression, and said, "MIA, boss is right. No one is more suited to be the manager of the ice cream shop than you. Furthermore, the customers clearly like you more, no one can resist your smile." Yarbemia pursed her lips and lowered her head at the sight of Meg and Sally's warm and encouraging expressions. She was silent for a while before saying, "But MIA wants to continue working at the restaurant, and she wants to continue serving those adorable customers." Meg looked at Yarbemia, who had her head lowered and her eyes reddened slightly. She was so thin and frail, and she gave off a very pitiful appearance. When he thought back to the first time they had met, he still found it hilarious and heart-wrenching at the same time. During this period of time, her energetic smile always made people feel that their moods were improving along with her smile. Now, looking at her conflicted expression, he felt as if he had done something wrong. She was still a 17 or 18-year-old girl, after all, and she had never had much confidence in herself. Even now, she still felt a little inferior when she left the restaurant, and this inferiority complex stemmed from her half-dragon identity. Sally looked at Yarbemia, and patted her on the shoulder. She didn't try to persuade her any further. Meg pondered for a moment before turning to Yarbemia, and said, "If that's the only reason, then I actually have a solution. It's just that you'll have to work a lot harder, MIA. I'm not afraid of hard work." Yarbemia's eyes immediately lit up. The ice cream shop and Amy's can operate at different times. When the restaurant is open, the ice cream shop is closed, so you can continue to work at the restaurant. After the restaurant is closed, you can go to the ice cream shop, and the ice cream shop will be open for business. However, in that case, you'll be working 2 jobs at the same time, and it'll be very tiring. Meg nodded. "In that case, do I still have to be the manager?" Yarbemia was still a little hesitant. "MIA, I've always told Amy that she's no different from other people. Half-elves, humans, and elves all exist on equal footing. That's the only way to live in the world. And you're the closest role model that Amy can see. If you can't beat yourself, then you can't beat any enemy." Meg looked into Yarbemia's eyes as he spoke calmly. Yarbemia slowly raised her head, and her eyes gradually lit up as she looked at Meg. She clenched her fists and nodded vigorously. "All right, I'll do everything well, including being the manager. I'll be a good role model for Amy. I believe you can do it." A smile appeared on Meg's face. It looked like he would have to take his time to recruit a new server. At the same time, he felt a stab of pain in his conscience. Exploiting his employees like this was a little cruel. A smile also appeared on Sally's face. "Let's get ready for business. I'll take care of the matters regarding the branch." Meg rose to his feet with a smile as he made his way out of the restaurant. "Aisha, can I do it well?" Yarbemia turned to Sally with a feeble expression. "Of course. Boss is the best judge of character I've ever met." Sally nodded in a firm manner. Then I'll need your help when the time comes. A smile reappeared on Yabemia's face. If you're willing to let me work part-time and pay me, then I'd be more than happy to help. Sally nodded, and the two of them smiled in unison. After the morning service, Meg made a trip to the City Lord's castle. The Aiden Square Management Office had already completed the handover of Ricky's rotisserie. He signed his name and paid a processing fee, upon which Ricky's rotisserie would belong to him. TSK, gambling really does a lot of harm. Meg stood outside Ricky's rotisserie, where half of the signboard had been destroyed, and heaved a forlorn sigh. Back in the day, he had only gambled a little on the outskirts of Ricky's rotisserie, but that was purely for the sake of entertainment. He was basically a money spinner, but the money he spent was just a drop in the bucket. Ricky's rotisserie had already been sealed by the City Lord's castle, and there was a large copper lock on the door. Meg pulled out the key that he had taken from the City Lord's castle, unlocked the door, and entered the restaurant. Aside from the fact that the tables and chairs were a little messy, there wasn't much damage to the place. However, almost everything in the kitchen had been emptied out, and not even a paring knife had been left behind. The restaurant was over 200 square meters in size, and he could imagine how lively it must have been in the past. If that fatso hadn't provoked him with his incessant chatter, this restaurant would have been enough to sustain him for the rest of his life. Chapter 603. The tables and chairs are 80% new, and each set costs 200 copper coins for a total of 8,000 copper coins. The furnishings are all low-grade fake goods, so the price is 2,000 copper coins. The rest of the items are basically worthless, but the system can handle them on your behalf, the system's voice quickly sounded. This is really a one-stop service, you don't want to miss out on a single cent. Meg raised his eyebrows. He didn't expect the system to be so straightforward this time. Consider it service to the utmost. This is the system's mission and philosophy, the system said righteously. Such a large restaurant must have cost a lot of money to renovate. These are all solid wood tables and chairs, and they are almost 90% new. 200 copper coins for a set is too cheap, right? Fixed price, 300 copper coins for a set, Meg said decisively, shaking his head. 250 copper coins for a set, definitely not more. If the host thinks that he can find a suitable buyer in a short period of time, you can handle it however you want, the system said decisively. Meg raised his eyebrows slightly. The system was sure that he didn't need the things in this barbecue shop, and he couldn't be bothered to deal with the matter of selling second-hand tables and chairs. With a serious expression, he said, "System, you can be considered half a businessman. 250 copper coins sounds bad, 251 copper coins for a set. Take it away immediately. You are the owner of Mammoth, and you make hundreds of thousands of copper coins a day. You actually want to talk to me about a copper coin price? Don't you think that this is lowering your status?" The system said angrily. "You are the god of cookery cultivation system. You know the heavens above and the earth below. You can build any aircraft carrier or warship you want, and you have an assembly line for airplanes and cannons. What's the point of arguing with me over a copper coin?" Meg retorted in an unconvinced manner. "Deal. All items in the barbecue shop will be priced at 12,040 copper coins. Recycling in progress. Ding. Recycling complete. The cost has been transferred to the host's cashier." After a moment of silence, the system gritted its teeth and completed the transaction. Meg looked at the barbecue shop that had become empty in the blink of an eye. Even the painting of a bird on the wall had been taken away. Even bandits couldn't clean it up so cleanly. "System, this is the location of the ice cream shop. My request is to set aside 40 square meters of space on the far right side of the restaurant and turn it into an ice cream shop. The remaining space on the upper floor and the storefront remain untouched. You may begin the renovation now," Meg said with a smile. "Host, didn't you say 30 square meters? How did it become 40 square meters? If that's the case, the renovation fee we agreed on earlier will be invalid," the system cried out in agitation. "I was planning to make a small ice cream shop, but I don't think I'll be using this shop for the time being. So I decided to make it bigger and set up a few more small tables so that customers can sit down and slowly enjoy the ice cream. Meg said matter-of-factly, as for the cost, I only have a budget of 100,000 copper coins. 10 square meters is just a matter of a few floor tiles and a few tables. You don't have to be so excited. What do you mean by a few floor tiles and a few tables? An extra 10 square meters means that we have to completely overturn the previous renovation design. Moreover, the materials and quality of this system are definitely of the highest quality. This extra 10 square meters is a quarter of the budget. You're simply black-hearted to the extreme, the system said angrily. In any case, I'll leave it to you. Tell me if it's okay or not. If it's not okay, I'll go out and find a painter. I just saw a dwarf holding a wooden board looking for a painter just now. Meg stood up and walked towards the entrance of the restaurant without hesitation. Fine. I'll do it. The system's annoyed voice sounded. Ding. The ice cream shop renovation cooperation has been reached. Renovation time limit, 5 minutes. Ding. 100,000 copper coins have been successfully deducted. Host, please choose the renovation style. Meg looked at the dozens of renovation plans that appeared in his mind. After looking at them for a while, he pointed at the ice cream shop with the theme of the Ice Queen and said, I'll choose this one. Ding. Renovation style confirmed. Renovation will begin in 1 minute. Alright, I'll go upstairs and take a look. A faint smile appeared on Meg's face. He had a million ways to deal with the system. There was a staircase beside the kitchen that led upstairs. Meg slowly made his way up. After taking a few steps, he could see that there was some dust on the staircase, indicating that there weren't many people walking around. The door to the second floor was closed, but it wasn't locked. Meg pushed it open with a light hand, and a rotting smell immediately wafted toward him. Meg covered his nose with his hand and looked around. This place was clearly the storage room of Ricky's rotisserie. The lighting was very dim, and there were only 2 small windows. The large freezers were all wide open, and there wasn't a single piece of meat inside. It was unclear whether this was done by Ricky's employees or by Ricky's employees. There were also some ice shards on the ground. Aside from some rotten vegetable leaves in the corner, everything else had been removed. Meg didn't really care about this. Even though it was clearly stated in the contract that he couldn't remove anything from the restaurant, he had no interest in the ingredients of Ricky's rotisserie. The second floor was about the same size as the first floor. If all 4 sides were replaced with glass windows, they could definitely open up a restaurant or coffee shop. Meg only took a few glances at the second floor before closing the door. He didn't even enter the second floor. The sounds of renovation gradually died down, and he made his way down the stairs. Ding. The ice cream shop has been renovated successfully. Please inspect it. If you are satisfied, please leave a positive review. Meg had only just made his way down the stairs when the system's voice sounded. Meg looked at the ice cream shop that had already been partitioned off. He pushed open the door and looked to the far right, upon which his eyes immediately lit up. An ice cream shop with an ice blue and white theme appeared before his eyes. Snowflakes were slowly drifting down from the 2-story floor-to-ceiling windows, and an ice queen in a blue and silver dress with a crown on her head stood at the center of the ice cream shop. Snowflakes revolved around her, and the entire ice cream shop was like a palace situated within a snowy mountain. It was grand yet intricate, and the fact that it was situated in the Aden Square made one want to go in and explore it. However, the ice cream shop had most likely been hidden by the system, so no one had noticed such an eye-catching ice cream shop that had suddenly appeared on the side of the road. This was exactly what Mag wanted. An ice cream shop that had appeared out of nowhere was far too eye-catching. It's not bad. Meg opened the crystal door and nodded with a pleased expression. Such a stylish renovation had only cost him 100,000 copper coins. 100 gold coins. There was nothing to complain about. Of course, there was no way the system was going to praise him. Chapter 604. This is my 101st attempt. I should be able to succeed this time, right? Within a cavernous cave, a young woman with short pink hair stood in front of an antiquated stone statue spell formation. She gripped her wand with a nervous expression as she slowly took a step forward before slowly raising her left hand. Which idiot decided that we had to use blood to activate spell formations? There's nothing new about this method at all, and it really hurts. The young girl looked at her delicate fingers with a resentful expression. She looked at the white jade pillar in the center of the spell formation, and then looked at her own fingers. After hesitating for a long while, she gritted her teeth and took 2 steps forward. "The woman of the moon will never admit defeat," she said with a determined expression. She pulled out a thin needle and stabbed it into her fingertip with a trembling hand. An extremely blood-curdling cry reverberated throughout the cave, and a drop of golden blood slowly flowed from her fingertip. "Let me see where this spell formation that I've been repairing for 10 years leads to." The young woman's face paled slightly, and her lips trembled as she made her way toward the white jade pillar. "Amy's father, are you really going to open another ice cream shop? The kind that only sells ice cream?" Amy looked at Meg, who was grilling beef kebabs in the kitchen, with an elated look on her face. "That's right. Furthermore, Mia will be the manager of the ice cream shop. It's a shop that only sells ice cream. You'll be able to see it in 2 days. It's a very beautiful ice cream shop." Mag nodded with a smile. "I'm afraid I won't be able to do it well," Yarbemia said in a quiet voice with a hint of concern on her face. "Wow, Big Sister Emie is so awesome. Manager." Amy's eyes lit up, and she slowly inched closer to Yarbemia as she whispered, "Big Sister Yarbemia, you're the store manager, so can I sneak into your ice cream shop to eat ice cream in the future? You can't tell father about this." Meow Tilda Ugly Duckling also made its way over to Yarbemia with anticipation in its eyes. Well, Yarbemia looked like she was in a dilemma. "I heard everything. You 2 brats, you're not allowed to sneak over to Mia's place to eat ice cream." Meg turned around and warned the 2 brats. "All right, then I can only eat in the restaurant." Amy stuck out her little tongue and returned to her seat with a resigned expression. Ugly Duckling also shook its head dejectedly. It walked over to Amy and rubbed its head against her calf. She then picked it up and placed it on her lap, where it curled up comfortably. "All right, the barbecue is done. Let's eat." Meg placed the 3 different flavors of roast beef kebabs on 3 separate plates and walked out of the kitchen with a smile on his face. At this moment, a golden light suddenly lit up in the middle of the restaurant. The light was so bright that it was almost blinding. "What's that?" A perplexed look appeared on Meg's face as he looked at a series of complex lines on the ground. It appeared to be a teleportation spell formation. Sally had already stood in front of Amy and was looking at the golden light with a grave expression. She could sense powerful magic fluctuations emanating from it, and if she wasn't mistaken, that was most likely a very rare type of spatial magic. Yarbemia stood off to the side and looked at the golden light with a slightly perplexed expression. "What's that?" Amy poked her head out from behind Sally and looked at the golden light with a curious expression. Meow Tilda Ugly Duckling also stood up from Amy's lap and let out a warning cry toward the golden light. It seemed to be a little nervous. The dazzling golden light receded, and a young woman in a long pink dress appeared in the restaurant. She took a look at everyone in the restaurant and raised her chin with a hint of disdain in her eyes as she said, "You've summoned the esteemed Princess Barbara here. Hurry up and kneel down to welcome her." Everyone in the restaurant was completely silent as they appraised the young woman who had suddenly appeared. The young woman appeared to be around 15 or 16 years old, and was less than 1.4 meters tall. Her short pink hair made her snowy white skin appear even more translucent, and her slightly round face was quite adorable. However, her complexion was a little sickly pale, and there was a light pink crescent moon mark on her glabella. However, her expression was a little arrogant, and her words were very childish, making it difficult for anyone to respond to her. "I say, are you all deaf? Why aren't you kneeling when you see me? And how dare you look at me like that?" Barbara pointed at Meg with an enraged expression as she yelled, "Especially that perverted old man with the beard over there. Do you think I'm an old man like you can look at?" Old man?" Meg's eyes widened. He had lived for so long, and had heard all kinds of titles that others had given him. Even young ladies born after the millennium would sweetly call him uncle when they saw him. Who would have thought that he would encounter a setback here? He was actually being called an old man by a young lady. That sexy mustache was comparable to Peng Yuyen's masculinity, yet he was actually being called perverted. This guy was simply incorrigible. I say, Auntie, where did you come from? You're already so old, yet you're still dressed in such pink to pretend to be a little princess. Aren't you tired? I also know who doesn't have a girl's heart, but it's fine if you play at home, but you came to my restaurant to play Descend, and you even forced yourself to say that you were summoned by us. This is your fault. Which idiot summoned beast would look like this? Ma Chang looked at the pink-haired young lady with a fake smile as he spoke. He was very satisfied with this face that had been altered to look like his in his previous life, and he wouldn't allow anyone to insult it. You. Barbara pointed at Meg, and her face flushed red. She felt as if she was about to explode. No one had ever dared to talk to her like that. This guy with the beard actually called her auntie, and he even thought that no one would summon a beast like her. The nobles of the Moon Nation couldn't grow beards. This was a very important rule, so this man must be a vulgar servant. It was a great shame that such a servant dared to mock her like this. I'll let you know that you have to pay the price for offending me. Barbara looked at Meg furiously, and raised her right hand. The glass on the counter beside Meg suddenly trembled slightly. Be careful. Sally reminded him with a serious expression. Her right hand was already holding onto her magic caster's staff. I don't know what the price for offending you is, but if you offend me, you'll be blacklisted in the restaurant, and you'll never be able to set foot in the restaurant again, Meg said with a calm expression. You. Barbara was enraged, and blood rushed to her head. Her face instantly paled, and her body swayed, and she fell to the ground. Chapter 605. Father, who is this big sister Pink? Why did she suddenly appear in our restaurant? Amy made her way over to Barbara, who was lying on the ground, with a curious look on her face. She doesn't seem to know where she is, and she calls herself a princess. Could she really be a princess? Yabemia also made her way over with a perplexed look on her face. I don't know who she is, either. If she's not a delusional person, then she's most likely a princess who came from some remote mountain village. I don't think there's a princess like that in the Roth Empire. Meg shook his head with a shake of his head. He was also rather perplexed by this girl who was full of delusions. She most likely teleported here using a teleportation spell formation, but I don't know if it was a fixed teleportation spell formation or a random teleportation spell formation. Furthermore, she's a powerful spatial magic caster with at least 7th tier power, but there's no princess of her age in the Roth Empire's royal family. Sally put away her wand and squatted down to examine Barbara's complexion. Her brows furrowed as she said, her blood essence is very weak, and that's why she fainted. Then what should we do now? Father, let's save her. Big Sister Pink is so pitiful. Amy looked up at Meg with a pleading expression. Can you wake her up, Aisha? Meg was initially thinking about tossing this silly girl out of the restaurant, but his heart softened upon hearing Amy's pleas. He turned to Sally. I'll try, but I can't guarantee that she won't be hostile toward us after she wakes up. Sally nodded as she pulled out her wand and twirled it around Barbara's head. A faint green halo appeared above her head before slowly fusing into a tender green leaf, which drifted down to her glabella before fusing into the pink crescent moon on her glabella. This crescent moon seems to be rather similar to the one on Princess Irina's glabella. It's just that Her Highness's crescent moon is light golden, while hers is light pink. Could it be that there's a connection between the two? A hint of confusion flashed through Sally's eyes, but she didn't express it. As the tender green leaf merged into Barbara's forehead, her pale face finally regained some color. Her furrowed brows slowly relaxed, and after a while, she let out a soft moan. Before she opened her eyes, her nose twitched, and the rich aroma of barbecued meat wafted into her nose. This aroma, could it be barbecue? But how can the barbecue have such an alluring aroma? Barbara had already sobered up a little, and her heart was immediately aroused by the tempting aroma. Barbecue was her favorite food, and it was an essential part of her daily diet. She had thought that the barbecue cooked by the chefs in the palace was already the most delicious, but after smelling this aroma, she discovered that just this aroma alone was thousands of times better than that of the chefs in the palace. It had already taken half a day to repair the spell formation, and she was already feeling quite hungry. She could already imagine just how delicious the barbecue meat would be once it melted in her mouth, and she began to salivate uncontrollably. Barbecue! Barbara swallowed her saliva as she slowly opened her eyes. Her gaze just so happened to fall upon the kebab in Meg's hand, and her eyes immediately lit up as her stomach began to grumble. She was like a traveler in the desert who had suddenly discovered a source of water. Could it be that she fainted from hunger? She's so pitiful. Amy looked at Barbara with a sympathetic expression. I think that's quite possible. Meg nodded in agreement. Just what kind of suffering did she go through before coming here? Even though she's starving, she still has to put on a brave front and pretend to be a princess. Yarbemia heaved a forlorn sigh. Everyone has their own difficulties, so I can empathize with her. Sally nodded. Ha! Barbara's attention had been completely drawn away by the roast beef kebab, but she immediately raised her head to look at the pitiful expressions on everyone's faces. She suddenly came to her senses, and realized that she seemed to have lost her composure. Her face immediately flushed red, and she couldn't believe that she had been misunderstood by these people. Furthermore, they were speaking to her in such a pitiful tone, as if she were a poor homeless person. However, the cool sensation on her glabella, as well as the nausea she had felt after being teleported away, had completely disappeared. It appeared that these people had treated her after she fainted. Otherwise, she didn't know how long it would have taken for her to wake up. If she missed this opportunity, she might never be able to return. Furthermore, the man holding the 3 plates of kebabs didn't seem to be as ugly as she had imagined. Even though his beard was a little twisted, his face was still quite handsome, and he was quite pleasing to the eye. Meanwhile, the little girl beside him was far too adorable. It was just that her ears were pointy and translucent. The other 2 girls also looked a little strange, but they were both very beautiful. Ahem, I don't need your pity. I've always been the one to take pity on others, while others can only admire me. Barbara got up from the ground and raised her chin again as she said, however, seeing as you've saved my life, I'll overlook your rudeness. Not everyone can come across such a good thing. Even though she still wore a haughty expression as she spoke, she couldn't help but glance at the kebabs in Meg's hands out of the corner of her eye. Her throat was still trembling slightly as she tried to restrain herself from swallowing. All right, princess. If there's nothing else, you can leave now. We have to prepare to eat. Meg rolled his eyes as he turned to Barbara with a smile. It appeared that this girl really was hopeless. Big Sister Pink, you have to go eat as soon as possible. It'll be bad if you faint from hunger. Amy cautioned with a serious expression as she caught Ugly Duckling, which was just about to pounce on her. She held it in her arms and knocked it on the head as she said, Ugly Duckling, don't try to pounce on beautiful big sisters whenever you see them. If you do that again, I'm going to throw you away. Sally took a glance at Barbara to see that she didn't harbor any animosity toward her, so she put away her wand and made her way over to the long table. Yarbemia opened its mouth to say something, but it looked at Meg before obediently closing its mouth again. It clearly wasn't a good idea to invite someone to eat with them without the boss' permission. Meg placed the kebabs on the table and sat down. He picked up his chopsticks and looked at Barbara with furrowed brows. Chapter 606. I refuse. Meg shook his head without any hesitation. He pointed at the door with his chopsticks and said, The door is over there, Your Highness. Please step out from there. Of course, if you want to eat in the restaurant, you can go out and line up first. You can order after the restaurant officially opens. Here, even princesses have to line up. You. Barbara stared at Meg with her mouth wide open, as if she couldn't believe her ears. This guy actually refused her request, and he even told her to go out and line up before she could eat in the restaurant. Blood rushed to Barbara's head, and her body swayed. She felt as if she was going to faint again, and she had to support herself with the table beside her to support herself. Your Highness, please don't faint just because you don't like what you say. It's going to affect our meal progress. It's going to be hard on Aisha to save you, and she still has to go to work in a while. Meg raised his eyebrows as he looked at Barbara with a resigned expression. He didn't know if this girl was suffering from hypoglycemia or anemia, but she was simply too weak. Barbara glared at Meg, and she supported herself with the table as she tried to leave. She had never been humiliated like this before. She was a noble princess, so how could she accept this? Thus, she had to leave. Father, this big sister is so pitiful. Look at how weak she is, it looks like she can't even walk. Why don't we? Amy looked at Barbara with pity in her eyes. She took a bite out of a kebab, and an expression of enjoyment appeared on her little face as she chewed happily. Today's roast beef is also delicious, it's fragrant and tender. Gulp. Barbara, who was about to leave, couldn't help but gulp. She looked at Amy, who was immersed in the delicious taste of the roast beef, and felt as if her legs were filled with lead. She looked at Amy, and thought to herself, this little girl is so cute, so she must be very kind. Maybe she'll take the initiative to ask me to stay for dinner. When the time comes, I'll just have to say no and sit down, and then I'll be able to enjoy the delicious roast beef. Amy swallowed the beef in her mouth, and only then did she think of Barbara. She looked at her with a sweet smile, and said, why don't we let her sit down and watch us eat? She should be able to walk after resting for a while. Barbara felt as if an arrow to her heart. Was there anything crueler in this world than letting a starving person watch others eat? This little girl looked innocent and cute, but if she was cut open, she would definitely be as black as her father. After taking 2 steps toward the door, Barbara's legs went weak, and she lost control of her body and fell directly onto a table, facing Meg and the others. Her face turned even redder, and she tried to get up, but she felt as if her body was completely powerless. She felt as if her heart had been twisted into a fried dough twist. Damn it, why did it have to happen now? It must be because that stupid stone pillar just now sucked too much of my blood. My reputation is going to be ruined here. I think this little girl is really hungry. She can't even stand. Boss, why don't we let her eat with us first? Otherwise, she won't even be able to walk out of the restaurant. Yarbemia looked at Meg and said, yes, father, I think big sister MIA is right. This little girl must have run away from selling matches, and she's about to starve to death. Amy nodded in agreement. Meg thought for a moment, then nodded and said, all right, then let our princess sit down and eat something first. This little girl really did look like she was starving. It would be a little inhumane to drive her out like this. Let me help you over. Yarbemia got up and walked toward Barbara. Barbara straightened her body slightly and nodded slightly. All right, since you guys are so sincere in inviting me, I'll reluctantly agree to eat with you guys. However, I have to use silver cutlery, wash my hands with white flower dew, and wipe my hands with a silk towel. I'll drink a bowl of soup first, and then, the faucet is in the kitchen, and the cutlery is on the table. I didn't prepare any soup for lunch today. Of course, if you feel wronged, you can refuse. Meg interrupted Barbara, then smiled and said, also, you're only eating in advance. It's not free. Barbara stared into Meg's eyes for a while before averting her gaze in the end. This man was the most ungentlemanly, brazen, and petty man she had ever seen. However, Barbara chose to give in the end as she smelled the alluring aroma of roast meat and looked at the glistening roast beef. She pursed her lips and harumphed lightly, but didn't dare to show too much displeasure on her face as this man really could kick her out right now. When I get back to the royal palace, I'm going to get father to find this guy and let him know who the princess of the Moon Nation is. I'm not someone a bearded man like him can humiliate. Barbara thought to herself viciously as she allowed Yarbemia to help her sit down at the long table. Meow. Ugly duckling, which was lying in Amy's arms, extended its little paw and meowed at Barbara with a hint of hostility in its eyes. Mph, kitty, how dare you yell at me? Barbara also glared at Ugly Duckling, neither of them willing to back down. Ugly Duckling, don't bully big sister Pink. She can't even beat you now. Amy pressed down on Ugly Duckling's little paw with a meaningful expression. Meow tilde Ugly Duckling took a glance at Barbara before withdrawing its little paw with a disdainful look on its face. I'm being looked down on by a kitty. Barbara was starting to doubt her life. There's just enough food on the table for us to eat. You can choose 1 or 2 dishes for lunch now, and I'll go get more, Meg said to Barbara in a calm voice. She was a customer now. I want roast meat. 1 plate. Barbara withdrew her gaze from Ugly Duckling and looked at the roast meat on the table without any hesitation. There are 3 flavors of roast meat. Do you want one of them, or some of all 3? Meg asked. All 3 flavors are super delicious, Amy reminded in a quiet voice as she took another bite of the roast beef in her hand. I want all 3. Barbara nodded. Chapter 607. The kebab that had just been removed from the grill was still steaming hot, and the alluring aroma of roast meat wafted over. Barbara's eyes lit up as the aroma of roast meat became extremely clear and rich. It was hard to imagine that roast meat could give off such an alluring aroma, and she felt as if she were in a dream. However, she secretly pinched her own leg under the table, and the sharp pain made her realize that this wasn't a dream. Instead, this was reality, and there was an irresistible kebab right in front of her. Then I'll just have to force myself to try this roast beef. Barbara tried her best to maintain a calm expression as she grabbed a kebab. This method of eating wasn't very elegant, and under normal circumstances, she definitely wouldn't eat food like this. However, she had just seen the little girl grab a kebab with one hand and take a bite of it with her mouth, and she felt that this was the correct way to eat a kebab. Meg took a glance at Barbara before walking toward the kitchen with a faint smile on his face. He had seen even more stubborn people in the past, but all of them had succumbed in the face of delicious food in the end. But I feel like you really, really want to eat it. Amy looked at Barbara with a merciless expression. Yabemia and Sally also had smiles on their faces. This little girl had just swallowed her saliva countless times in front of them, and her words were completely unconvincing. Let me see if this bearded old man's roast meat really is as good as it sounds. If it's just the aroma, then I'm definitely going to make father shut down this restaurant. Barbara's face became even redder as she looked at the kebab in her hand, and bit into the entire kebab in a slightly angry manner. Yup. Barbara's eyes immediately lit up as she bit into the tender beef. She chewed carefully, and juices began to flow from the beef. The rich aroma of the meat intertwined with the sauce that had been applied to the beef, and the delectable flavor exploded in her mouth. It was as if her taste buds had been ignited and were cheering. They were screaming. Every time he chewed a whole piece of beef, he would feel full of satisfaction. The fat in the beef made the texture of the beef very distinct, making it impossible for him to stop chewing. Every time he chewed, it would be an extreme enjoyment to his taste buds. The slightly spicy texture was a result of the miraculous effects of the spices. It was like a stroke of genius, elevating the flavor of the kebab to a whole new level. It was as if Barbara could see a strong and muscular bull galloping across the plains, its strong muscles making one drool. More and more bulls gathered to form a herd and galloped across the plains. The sound of their footsteps was like a drumbeat that fell on her heart. The rhythm was so moving. Is this beef? This is incredible. It's countless times better than the roast beef cooked by the royal chef. These are 2 completely different types of food. Barbara's soul was trembling, and she felt as if she had been eating fake roast beef for the past decade or so. The tender kebab slid down the tip of her tongue, and Barbara swallowed it. She felt as if a warm current had flowed down her throat and into her stomach, and the warmth immediately spread to her limbs and bones. Her sore and weak legs slowly recovered some feeling and strength, and a hint of color returned to her pale face. The effect of this kebab is so special. It actually has some effect on blood essence. Barbara immediately opened her eyes and looked at the kebab in her hand with an incredulous expression. She had been lacking in blood essence ever since she was a child, so she often fainted. She had eaten countless rare fruits and received treatment from all of the renowned doctors in the Moon Nation, but none of them had any effect. She didn't think that this small piece of beef would have an effect even greater than that of a spirit fruit. Barbara bit into the second piece of beef with surprise and uncertainty in her heart. The delicious flavor wreaked havoc in her mouth, and wave after wave of delicious flavor made her almost forget to breathe. After swallowing the second piece of beef, The warm current in her stomach became even more pronounced, and it felt as if blood essence was slowly being generated and flowing into her blood vessels, then into her limbs and bones. This feeling was very special, and it was as if rain had suddenly fallen from the sky in a dry desert. Even though it was a little insignificant, she could clearly sense that this was a cycle, and it wasn't just being emitted by the beef. Could it be that there's a cure for my illness? Barbara almost couldn't believe her own feelings. Countless doctors had determined that there was no cure for her illness, and she had to pretend that she was fine every time she fainted. Was there really going to be an end to her days like this? Barbara's eyes were already red, and she took another bite of the beef. She was enjoying the delicious flavor, and at the same time, she was also hopeful that her illness could be cured. What's wrong, Big Sister Pink? Are you going to cry because of the delicious food? Amy asked in a quiet voice. I think so. This is the first time I've eaten Boss's food, and I also feel like I'm dreaming. It's so delicious. Yarbemia nodded in agreement. In the kitchen, the smile on Meg's face became even more vibrant. The temptation of delicious food really was irresistible. Even though this girl was a little tsunda, she still revealed her true colors in the face of delicious food. Roast beef really is delicious. Barbara quickly finished the kebab, and she couldn't help but exclaim as she looked at the barren bamboo skewer in her hand. However, she quickly noticed that everyone was looking at her, and a faint blush appeared on her face. Thinking back to what she had said earlier, she really wanted to find a hole to hide in. Your Highness, is the roast beef kebab to your liking? Meg stood at the entrance of the kitchen, and looked at Barbara with a smile. It's not bad. Barbara was going against her will as she looked at Meg, and carefully appraised him from head to toe again. When she had first been teleported here, she had been a little nervous, so she didn't pay much attention to him. All she could remember was that mustache, and she immediately associated it with a perverted old man. However, Meg was standing at the entrance of the kitchen, and he was wearing a clean black and white chef suit. He was tall, and appeared to be around 30 years of age. The mustache on his upper lip didn't appear to be that perverted. Instead, it gave him a sense of maturity. Chapter 608. There's nothing on my face, is there? Princess, I think you should continue eating. If you faint in the restaurant again, I won't be able to take responsibility, Meg said with a smile as he went back into the kitchen to continue roasting meat. Stinky man. Barbara blushed, but her attention was quickly drawn to the roast beef kebab in front of her. She picked up another kebab, and this one was a little different in color from the previous one. She took a bite, and the aroma of garlic wreaked havoc in her mouth. It was completely different from the previous kebab, but it was still delicious. After eating 3 kebabs of different flavors in a row, Barbara was completely won over. It was so delicious that she couldn't stop eating. She had never eaten anything as delicious as this in her life. What was even more miraculous was that after eating 3 more kebabs, her feeble body had almost completely recovered. The blood essence flowing from her stomach into her veins made her feel as if she had been rejuvenated. What's your name, Big Sister Pink? Moreover, you said that you are a princess, then what kind of princess are you? Why do you look like you haven't eaten for many days? Could it be that your nation has already been destroyed, and you were hunted here by your enemies? Is that why you fainted as soon as you appeared? Amy asked as she looked at Barbara with a curious expression. Amy's string of questions attracted the attention of Yarbemia and Sally. Meg was also looking at Barbara with a curious expression. He was rather curious about this Chunibya girl's background. After all, spatial magic casters were very rare, and a 7th-tier spatial magic caster was even rarer. The principal of Chaos School, Novan, was a powerful spatial magic caster. No one could predict whether this girl, who had become a 7th-tier magic caster at the age of 15 or 16, would be able to become another spatial magic caster in the future. My name is Barbara, and I am the only princess of the Moon Nation. You live in the Moon Nation, but you don't know who I am. And you dare to say that the Moon Nation has already been destroyed? What a joke! Is there a nation more powerful than the Moon Nation in this world? Even on that faraway continent, there's no nation that can compare with the Moon Nation. Barbara said with a proud look on her face. Moon Nation? Meg and the others were puzzled. We're currently in Chaos City on the Norland continent. Chaos City isn't under the jurisdiction of any country, so we shouldn't be in the Moon Nation, Yarbemia said. As for Barbara, I've never heard of her. I've only heard of Princess Fios of the Roth Empire, Princess Irina of the Elven race, and the princesses of the Dragon race. Sally also shook her head. If I'm not wrong, we should be on the distant continent you mentioned. But miss, you don't really live on the moon, do you? Meg's expression suddenly became a little strange. Barbara's words gave him a strange conjecture. On the moon? Amy's eyes lit up. This is not the Moon Nation. Barbara's eyes also widened. She swept her gaze over Meg and the others, and saw that they weren't joking or lying. She immediately panicked. For someone like her who had never left the royal palace, the furthest place from home was the stone in the corner of the royal palace's garden. However, she had never stepped out of that stone because she had a powerful and loyal old servant following her closely. Of course, that loyalty was only for her father. It was because of this excessive love that she had persistently repaired the ancient teleportation formation in the cave behind the garden for the past 10 years. Even if the teleportation destination was only one wall away, it was worth it for her to take the risk. At least she could prove to her father, who always used "you're still young," that she was no longer a little kid who needed someone to follow behind her all the time. However, she didn't think that things would get out of hand. The teleportation destination wasn't one wall away from the royal palace, nor was it a city in the Moon Nation. It was very likely that they were teleported directly to the continent known as the ancient continent that could be seen in the Moon Nation. Yes, this isn't the Moon Nation. We've never even heard of the existence of the Moon Nation. Meg nodded with certainty. He didn't know if this girl really came from the moon, or if her worldview that she had painstakingly built had been shattered in an instant. Her expression didn't seem fake at all. Barbara picked up a kebab and took a bite of it to calm herself down. After a while, she suddenly jumped up from her chair and looked at Meg. She repeated, "This really isn't the Moon Nation?" "The Moon Nation. If your mind isn't in a mess, then perhaps there's a problem with your teleportation formation. It should be an ultra-long distance teleportation formation, so you've appeared here, which is far beyond the borders of your so-called Moon Nation." Meg nodded. Looking at Barbara's expression, he suddenly felt a sense of familiarity. To a certain extent, this girl's current situation could be considered a kind of transmigration. If it weren't for the fact that he had read a few web novels during his time as a student, his reaction to transmigration would most likely be even worse than hers. How is this possible? Barbara paced back and forth in the restaurant, and took another bite of kebab. Her heart was racing, and even her mind had gone completely blank. She had forcibly repaired the teleportation formation, and as soon as it was activated, she heard a cracking sound, so she didn't even consider using the teleportation formation to go back. After finishing a kebab, Barbara also stopped in her tracks, and stood right where she had been teleported from. Her wand reappeared in her hand, and she began to chant a spell. Silver light flashed on her wand, and it then transformed into a pillar of light that fell toward the ground. Circles of spell formation light emerged from the ground, and surrounded Barbara. Dense magic fluctuations began to appear. Is this a teleportation formation? Crassus, who was standing at the very front of the line, looked into the restaurant with a hint of surprise. I didn't think that there would be an ancient teleportation formation here. I wonder where this one leads to. Julian's eyes also lit up, and he moved his hands under his wide sleeves, and an invisible magic barrier enshrouded Amy's body. Crassus took a glance at Julian before withdrawing his gaze, and didn't say anything. Chapter 609. Your Majesty, Princess Barbara is missing. In a majestic palace, a female magic caster in a grey robe reported to a middle-aged man with a crown on his head with an urgent expression on her wrinkled face. What? The king abruptly rose to his feet, and hurriedly rushed forward as he asked, Barbara is missing? Haven't you been following her this entire time, Mage Greyer? How could she be missing? Your Majesty, I was supposed to leave the palace for an hour today as usual, and the princess is being watched by the palace maids. However, I couldn't find the princess anywhere today, and the palace maids couldn't tell me where the princess had gone, so I came to report this to you, Your Majesty, Greer replied in a sheepish manner. Barbara is quite mischievous, but she has always abided by the rules of the palace. She wouldn't leave the palace at will, and there are guards all around the palace, so she most likely hasn't left the palace. Go and find the princess. The king calmed himself down before issuing an order. Your Majesty. An elderly official hesitated momentarily before making his way over to the king and whispering something into his ear. Is that true? The king's expression changed slightly upon hearing this. I saw the princess enter that place before, but she told me that she was just having fun, so I didn't take it to heart. If the princess can't be found anywhere in the palace, then perhaps you should go and take a look, Your Majesty. The elderly official nodded in response. Before the elderly official had a chance to finish his sentence, the king had already made his way out of the palace. Not long after that, the king and the elderly official appeared in a spacious cave. There was an antiquated spell formation at the center of the cave. The spell formation appeared to be quite ancient, and there were a series of conspicuous cracks all over it. However, the entire spell formation seemed to have been damaged. All of the materials used to repair it had been shattered, and there were even some new cracks on the spell formation. Only the white jade pillar at the center of the spell formation was still intact. Your Majesty, the ancient teleportation spell formation has been activated. Judging from the magic fluctuations, it should have been activated less than an hour ago. The elderly official walked around the spell formation with a grave expression on his face as he said, only the princess can activate the spell formation. If the teleportation was successful, then she could. How is this possible? He's just a child. A pained expression appeared on the king's face as he looked at the broken rune. He knew very well where the rune led to. It was hidden in the depths of the palace, and only he could enter and exit the cave. However, this spell formation had been abandoned countless years ago. It had been repaired several times, but it still couldn't be used, so it was most likely that the teleportation spell formation on the other side had been destroyed. However, Barbara had managed to repair this spell formation and activate it. Maybe someone repaired the teleportation array on the other side, and Her Highness just happened to activate it at that time. The elderly official also wore a grave expression on his face. He knew how important Princess Barbara was to the king, and if she really was teleported to that continent, she would be all alone. This was a scene that the princess, who had lived an extravagant life since she was a child, couldn't imagine. Will she be able to teleport back? The king looked at the elderly official as if he were grasping at straws. This teleportation spell formation has already been severely damaged. Before it's repaired, Her Majesty won't be able to teleport back. The elderly official shook his head. The king clenched his fists and fell silent for a moment before ordering, "Pass down my orders. All magic casters who are proficient in spell formations and spatial magic, as well as skilled craftsmen, are to enter the palace." "Yes, Your Majesty." The elderly official glanced at the king with a concerned expression before quickly departing. "Barbara, wait for father. Father will definitely come and take you home." A dull voice reverberated throughout the silent cave. "That seems a little too violent." Meg's expression was a little peculiar upon hearing Amy's words. "But didn't we agree to be a little more violent? Just like this." Amy looked at Mag, and then raised her little hands into little fists, and put them in front of her little face as she earnestly said, "Eat. Pay up. Otherwise, I'll beat you all to death." "Amy is so cute." Yarbemia smiled as she pinched Amy's little cheeks. "Big sister MIA, I'm super fierce." Amy bared her teeth at MIA with a serious expression, and she looked even more adorable now. "Don't be in a hurry. Let's see if Her Majesty can teleport back first." Mag shook his head with a smile. The murder of 4 kebabs was far too gruesome, and he couldn't bring himself to do something like that. If this Chunibya girl could really teleport away, then she could be considered a successful one-time transmigrator. If she could travel freely between worlds, then perhaps she could even become an outstanding transmigrator. There were many transmigrators who could do that. The silver light became brighter and brighter, and Barbara's body was almost completely enshrouded. A series of complex runes appeared on the spell formation on the ground, and it looked as if it were about to fly away. This spell formation can be activated too. A look of elation appeared on Barbara's face. She was most worried that the spell formation would break down, and then everything would be for naught. However, this spell formation was clearly more complete than the one in the royal palace, and it was successfully activated after being activated. Biu-biu, two faint sounds rang out, and the silver light instantly receded. The light from the spell formation disappeared, and the ground returned to normal. It failed. How could this be? Barbara stood at the center of the circle with a forlorn expression. She looked at the ground and the wand in her hand, and was unable to accept this reality. It failed. Amy's eyes lit up as she put down the wand and picked up another kebab. In that case, does that mean she won't be able to go home? She seems to be very sad. Yarbemia turned to Barbara with a concerned expression. The teleportation failed, so the spell formation on the other side must have failed. In that case, she won't be able to go back, Sally said in a soft voice. It's fine if she can't go back. As long as she's still alive, she'll be able to survive. Transmigration isn't a big deal. Meg offered words of consolation to Barbara, who was on the verge of tears. He had transmigrated here after dying, and at the very least, she hadn't experienced what it was like to die. That's easy for you to say, but if I can't go back, then I won't be the princess of the Moon Nation anymore. I won't be able to continue living in my castle, and I won't have an endless supply of dresses to wear every day. I'm so sad. War. Barbara glared at Meg before sitting down on the chair again, crying as she ate her kebab. Well, that's quite a tragic story, but you still have to pay for what you're eating. Meg looked at Barbara with a sympathetic expression. Chapter 610. That's right. Money, which can also be referred to as currency, is a product of exchange. On the Norland continent, the current common currencies are copper coins, silver coins, gold coins, and dragon coins. You ordered a total of 9 kebabs, and each kebab costs 300 copper coins, so you spent a total of 2,700 copper coins. Meg explained with a serious expression before turning to Barbara, and saying, "Don't tell me you didn't bring any money with you because you left in a hurry." This kind of cliché plot of running away from home is really too cliché. Barbara touched her dress, and suddenly realized that she hadn't brought anything with her aside from her wand when she stepped into the teleportation formation. In her eyes, there was nothing better than her identity as the princess of the Moon Nation. Everyone would respect and love her, and give her the best food, so she didn't have to worry about her livelihood. As for money, she had never come into contact with something like that before, and didn't know what it was for. However, she had to pay for the kebabs she had just eaten, and she didn't have anything in her pocket. Her identity as the princess of the Moon Nation wasn't recognized, so she didn't know what to do. Sally slowly lowered her head, and a faint blush appeared on her cheeks as she chewed on a kebab. "Big Sister Barbara, you have to pay for your meal. Otherwise, you'll be dining and dashing, and people who dine and dash will be beaten to death," Amy warned in a serious manner as she looked at Barbara. I don't have any money." Barbara's face was flushed, and she hesitated for a moment before replying in a dejected manner. She suddenly regretted walking into that spell formation and placing her finger on that stone pillar. Wasn't it better to be a little princess in the royal palace? Unfortunately, there was no medicine for regret now. In this unfamiliar place, the first problem she faced was how to solve the problem of not having enough money to pay the bill after eating. Furthermore, this shop owner didn't seem like a benevolent person. She didn't know what copper coins were, but 2,700 was definitely not a small number. She was completely penniless, and she didn't have anything of value on her aside from her wand. That adorable little girl was no pushover, either. Why was she being beaten to death just because she didn't have money to eat? Such a restaurant was simply a black restaurant, right? Of course, if they were in the Moon Nation right now, Barbara wouldn't mind rewarding Meg with a hefty reward. That kebabs were indeed the most delicious kebabs she had ever tasted. No money. Meg's brows furrowed as he looked at Barbara. He had already expected this, but when it came to her words be said to him, it was a little different to him. Ever since Amy's opening to the restaurant, no longer be it to dine and dash. Under the threat of Amy's threat, customers who didn't have enough money would all leave the restaurant to be seen on the menu too, and all of the customers to the restaurant to the food, to the extent to the customers, to the extent to Amy's, Amy to the customers. The restaurant's rules were cash transactions and no credit was allowed. But now, Barbara had already eaten the beef kebab, but she didn't have any money on her. Even if they detained her here, no one would come to bail her out. This was because she had just transmigrated here, and she didn't have any relatives. This problem suddenly became very troublesome. What should we do now, Father? Big Sister Barbara is quite adorable. Wouldn't it be a pity if we beat her to death? But if we don't beat her to death, then the restaurant's rules will be broken. Amy turned to Meg with a troubled expression. Meg looked up at Barbara. Amy's question was exactly what he was thinking. Don't do anything stupid. I'm the princess of the Moon Nation. If you dare to do anything stupid, my father will come looking for you, and that will be the day of your doom. Barbara immediately panicked as she looked at Meg with a nervous expression while gripping her wand tightly in her hand. The restaurant fell into a peculiar silence, and the atmosphere was a little tense. Boss, didn't you say you wanted to hire 2 more waitresses? I think Princess Barbara can consider it. If she becomes an employee of the restaurant, then we can deduct the cost of the kebabs from her salary. That way, we'll be able to settle the bill, and Princess Barbara can continue to finish the rest of the kebabs. Yabemia broke the silence with a smile. That sounds like a great idea. In that case, Big Sister Barbara will become the 3rd waitress of our restaurant, and we'll be a family. Amy's eyes lit up with elation. Sally looked at Barbara with a reserved opinion. Mag was also looking at Barbara with furrowed brows, but he wasn't in a hurry to express his opinion. He had very strict standards when it came to the selection of waitresses in his restaurant. Barbara had always been a spoiled brat, and it was hard to say if she would even be able to take care of herself. Asking her to become an exceptional waitress was like asking a cow to fly up a tree. I definitely won't become a waitress. I'm a princess. If the citizens of the Moon Nation find out that I'm working as a waitress, who will support me as their queen in the future? I wouldn't do something like that even if I were to die, Barbara said resolutely before Mag had a chance to speak. Aren't you already unable to go back? We've never even heard of the Moon Nation, so of course the people of the Moon Nation won't know that you're working as a waitress here. Yabemia persuaded earnestly. Furthermore, if you become a waitress, then you'll receive a fixed monthly salary, as well as a certain amount of allowance for meals. You'll be able to eat delicious food in the restaurant every day, and that's a much better life than wandering the streets. You're not familiar with this place, so where can you go after leaving the restaurant? Barbara looked at Yabemia, and her mouth gaped open, but she was at a loss for words. If she couldn't do anything in this world without money, then she really didn't know where to go with her penniless self. She stole a glance at the dining table to find that half of the roast beef kebabs had been eaten, and there were still 5 left untouched. There were also other dishes on the table that were also very tempting. Most importantly, the teleportation spell formation to return to the Moon Nation was in this restaurant. If her father repaired the spell formation in the Moon Nation, then she could use that spell formation to return to the Moon Nation. Only by staying in this restaurant would she be able to constantly observe the situation. Chapter 6:11. Perhaps you have some misunderstanding about the word waiter. The so-called waiter refers to a person who provides necessary services to the customers. I am the owner of this restaurant, and I have no intention of retiring for the time being, so I don't need to find someone to replace me as the manager. Although the restaurant needs to recruit new waiters, every waitress has to go through a test. If you want to become a waitress at Immerse, you have to pass my test first. Meg looked at Barbara and couldn't help but laugh. This girl really didn't have any common sense. Are you saying that you want me to serve those customers like how the palace maids serve me? Barbara looked at Mag with incredulity. Mag nodded. You can think of it that way. However, as a waitress in a restaurant, you don't have to be like your maids and carefully wipe your face clean with a towel. You only have to do your job well and maintain a friendly and distant relationship with the customers. Really? Barbara looked seriously at Meg's face. Serving others was something that would never have appeared in her life before today, but today's situation was somewhat out of her control. The roast beef kebabs made by Meg had a very special effect on her body. If she could eat them consistently, she might be able to completely improve her condition of lacking blood and qi. This was a condition that had troubled her for more than a decade. I don't think I need to answer your question now. You have to be clear about a very practical problem. I am not the one begging you to be a waitress at this restaurant. There are many better choices in the free market. They are skilled in the food and beverage industry's service skills, and they don't need a long period of training and practice before they can directly get to work. Mag looked at Barbara and calmly said, Now, I can give you a chance to showcase your abilities. If you can prove that you can do the job of an attendant and be more efficient than the average person, then this job will be yours. Is there such a strict requirement to be a waitress? Barbara's eyes widened a little as a fierce battle broke out in her mind. In the end, her desire to roast beef kebabs and go home defeated her pride. She looked at Meg and nodded. All right, although using me as a waitress is a complete waste of my talents, I am reluctantly willing to accept this job. Isn't a waitress's job just to serve dishes? This is a piece of cake. Barbara stretched out a finger and hooked it at the plate with the kebab on the table. The plate floated up and appeared in her hand in a flash. The kebab on the plate didn't move at all. I can quickly place the plates on every table. Not everyone has this ability, right? Barbara looked at Meg with a smug expression. She picked up a kebab from the plate and took a bite with a confident smile on her face. Amazing. Yarbemia looked at Barbara in awe. The plates are flying. What miraculous magic. Amy also exclaimed softly. Meg's eyes also lit up. Spatial magic casters were very rare, and this young girl was at least a 7th-tier spatial magic caster. If she were to use spatial magic to serve dishes, then she would have an advantage that no one else could compare with. Even though, it felt like a bit of a waste. However, thinking about it, he had already used a 7th-tier water elven magic caster to clean the restaurant, so it didn't seem like a big deal to have a spatial magic caster serve dishes. Indeed, not everyone can do this. If you can clearly remember the order and quantity of each customer's order, then you can become an employee of Immerse. Meg didn't express his praise on his face as he nodded at Barbara. My memory is pretty good. Barbara nodded with confidence. Don't be too full of yourself. Meg turned and entered the kitchen. Soon, he came out with a pile of plates of different sizes. He then pointed at the tables in the restaurant and said, Come in from the door. The tables are numbered from 1 to 4, and I'll tell you what plates are required for each table. Memorize them, then place all the plates on the table in order. If the number of wrong plates is less than 3, then you pass. Barbara nodded and said, No problem. This won't stump me at all. Table 3 requires 2 plates, 4 bowls, and 2 small plates. Table 6. Meg recited a string of numbers, and Barbara's relaxed expression also became very serious. Now, please begin your performance. Meg listed out 8 plates and bowls at the same time. This was already quite a demanding task for her to memorize. This test is very similar to mine. Can she pass? Yarbemia looked at Barbara with a nervous expression. Do your best, big sister Barbara. Amy took a bite of beef and encouraged her in a slightly inarticulate voice. Sally also looked at Barbara seriously. She didn't have much of a bad impression of this girl. Although she was a little spoiled, she wasn't to the point where she couldn't be saved. Barbara closed her eyes and thought for a while. When she opened her eyes again, the hundreds of bowls and plates on the table beside her floated up at the same time. They circled around her, and then flew out one by one, landing lightly on each table with almost no sound. In the blink of an eye, over 100 bowls and plates had all landed, and not a single one was left. Did I get it right? Barbara exhaled softly, and turned to look at Meg. Although she pretended to be relaxed, she couldn't hide the nervousness in her eyes. You got 2 wrong, but it's not bad to have such a high success rate on your first try. Meg walked over and picked up a plate and a small plate from tables 3 and 7. He looked at Barbara with a smile and said, "Congratulations, if you're willing, you'll become the 3rd waitress at Amy's. After deducting the beef kebabs from your first month's salary, your daily allowance will be 600 copper coins." A hint of elation appeared on Barbara's face, but she quickly repressed it. She looked at Meg with an indignant expression and said, "I can only eat 9 beef kebabs with the money I earn in a month. How am I supposed to survive in this place? Also, I can only eat 2 beef kebabs a day. If I eat like this, I'll starve to death. 600 copper coins a day. You can go out and ask around if there's a second restaurant in the Aden Square that would offer such a price to an intern waitress. If your salary can only afford 9 beef kebabs, then you shouldn't complain that your salary is too low. Instead, you should choose to eat the food that your salary can afford." Meg looked at Barbara with a calm expression. Chapter 6:12. I accept your conditions. Barbara looked at Meg in silence for a long time before finally nodding. However, she quickly added, "However, even though I may be your employee now, you have to treat me like a princess. I am the only princess of the Moon Nation, and I may even become the queen of the Moon Nation in the future. Since you know that you're my employee now, then you have to treat me like an employee. My restaurant doesn't need a princess, I only need a waitress who can serve the dishes." Meg shook his head, and there was no room for negotiation in his tone. "This guy is simply too rude." Barbara was a little annoyed, but she could only swallow her anger when she saw Meg's expression. This guy was different from all the men she had met in the past. "Welcome to Amy's. The restaurant is about to open for business, so we have to start eating first. We'll talk about the details after the restaurant closes. You don't have to work at noon, you just have to watch from the sidelines. Pay attention to Mia's work. Your mission is to be able to complete her work on your own one day." Meg saw that Barbara had no objections, and a benevolent smile finally appeared on his face. He glanced at the clock on the wall, and sat down again to eat. "Welcome. Welcome." Amy clapped her little hands, and looked at Barbara with a smile as she said, "Hello, big sister Barbara, I'm Amy. Hello, I'm Yarbemia. You can call me MIA. We'll be colleagues from now on." Yarbemia also looked at Barbara with a smile. "Aisha." Sally nodded slightly in response. "Ben." "Forget it, I'll allow you to call me Barbara." Barbara looked at the smiles on everyone's faces, and a sense of familiarity suddenly welled up in her heart. She nodded slightly, and returned to her seat with her plate. "I'm Meg. You can call me boss like the rest of them." Meg looked at Barbara with a smile. He wanted a waitress, and a waitress fell from the sky. If it weren't for the fact that the system didn't say anything, he would have thought that the waitress was a free gift from the system. Meg was very satisfied with the deal. As long as Barbara could take over Yarbemia's job, she could spend her time and energy at the ice cream shop except during peak hours. He was looking forward to the profits that the ice cream shop could bring him. Big Sister Barbara, aside from roast beef, Father's other dishes are also super delicious, Amy suggested as she took a bite out of a Ruggiamo. "I just want to eat roast meat right now." Barbara was unmoved, and continued to chew on her own beef. Mag and the rest finished their lunch very quickly, and only Amy and Barbara were left eating slowly. Mag glanced at the clock on the wall, and quickly walked to the entrance of the restaurant. What was supposed to be a leisurely lunch became a little rushed because of Barbara, an uninvited guest. Thankfully, the timing was just right. "Welcome," Meg said with a smile as he pushed open the door to the restaurant and looked at the long line of customers outside. Crassus and Julian, who were standing at the very front, walked in first, and their eyes fell on Barbara, who was sitting next to Amy. "That's..." Julian's eyes lit up when he saw the light pink crescent moon between Barbara's eyebrows. Could it be that she was teleported from there? The teleportation portal under the restaurant leads to that place? Crassus also looked a little surprised. "Hello, Master Halfbeard, Master Turtle, Amy greeted the two with a Ruggiamo in her hand. What powerful magic waves. These two old men don't seem to be any weaker than father and master. Could it be that they are also great magic casters? Isn't it said that the power of magic casters is very weak on this continent, and there are no great magic casters? Barbara turned to look at Crassus and Urian with a hint of bewilderment in her heart. Crassus and Julian looked at each other, and didn't say anything. They sat down at their usual seats, and ordered their usual food. Mr. Mac, who's that girl? Is she a new waitress? Harrison asked curiously as he came in and took a look at Barbara. Yes, she just started today, and hasn't officially started work yet. Meg nodded with a smile. You're so smart, Harrison said with admiration as he gave Meg a thumbs up. Meg only smiled and didn't say anything. He was really lucky this time. The restaurant was quickly filled to the brim with customers, and Barbara's mouth gaped open as she held the last kebab in her hand. She looked at Yarbemia, who was making her way through one table after another, and listened to the names of the dishes that came out of the customers' mouths. She felt as if her mind had been completely filled with information. There were so many dishes, so many customers, and so many different requests. How could she remember them all in such a short time? Barbara, who had been full of confidence, began to worry and doubt. In a study in the Morton Manor, a middle-aged man whispered to Cyril, second young master, young Mistress Gloria has been busy clearing out the fabrics in the warehouse for the past 2 days. She's also hired many tailors, and it seems that she's making some clothes. Making clothes? Hasn't the Suede Textiles shop been losing money for many years? Could it be that the orders have increased after she took over? Cyril raised an eyebrow as he looked at the middle-aged man with a slightly nervous expression. The fact that Gloria had become a candidate to inherit family Morton was like a thorn in his throat. Even though she had only inherited a textiles shop that had been losing money for many years, he still couldn't help but pay attention to her. That's not the case from what I understand. The Suede Textiles shop hasn't received many new orders, and there aren't many customers coming in to customize clothes. It's no different from usual. According to the employees of the Suede Textiles shop, Miss Gloria seems to be planning to make a batch of clothes according to the sizes of the clothes and sell them. The middle-aged man shook his head. Chapter 6:13. Are you sure I'll be able to do what he's doing? Barbara asked with incredulity as she looked at Meg, who had flipped the sign on the door and closed the door behind him. Our princess doesn't even have that much confidence. Meg looked at Barbara with a question of his own. Even he didn't have any confidence in himself, let alone her. Of course I do. Barbara blushed slightly as she stomped her foot, and raised her voice as she said, it's just ordering and serving dishes, I can do that with ease. I certainly hope so. Meg shrugged as he sized up Barbara with a serious expression. What are you doing? Barbara retracted her foot as she looked at Meg with a wary expression. Don't worry, big sister Barbara. Father won't be interested in your short legs, Amy consoled as she carried Ugly Duckling in her arms. Who said I have short legs? My legs are clearly very long, Barbara retorted with an indignant expression. She stood on her tiptoes, and a long and slender leg emerged from under her skirt. Just from the ratio alone, it didn't appear to be too short. Right at this moment, Sally took a step forward, and a long and slender leg emerged from under her chiphow. Barbara looked at the pair of long legs that were almost as tall as her chest, and silently retracted her leg as she looked at Sally with a pitiable and envious expression. The Heavenly King covers the Earth Tiger, Barbara is 1.5 meters tall. Amy smiled happily. A smile appeared on Meg's face. He didn't know where Amy had learned to say that, but Barbara wasn't 1.5 meters tall. She was probably only 1.4 meters tall. What kind of clothes do you want to wear? Meg asked the dejected Barbara. Barbara looked up at Meg with a perplexed expression. Yarbemia smiled and said, the boss is going to prepare a nice uniform for you, just like the one that Aisha and I have. Barbara's eyes lit up when she saw Yarbemia's and Sally's clothes. She looked at Meg expectantly and said, I like pretty dresses. It's best if they're pink. They're the most suitable for a cute little princess like me. Do you know what is the most taboo principle in pairing? Meg looked into Barbara's eyes and said seriously. No skirt. Barbara asked hesitantly. No, it's the same color from head to toe, even including socks. Mag pointed at Barbara's feet, and a pink sock peeked out from her pink shoes. How is that possible? Pink was obviously so cute. Was there anything cuter than pink? It's the color of a princess, Barbara said indignantly. However, she still instinctively moved her foot back a little as she glared at Mag. Mag rolled his eyes and pursed his lips. From your head to your feet, people who don't know you would think you just rolled out of pink flour. I. Barbara opened her mouth, but she didn't know how to retort. She lowered her head and looked at the outfit that she had liked for over 10 years. Now that Mag had said that, it did indeed look a little strange. What is pink flour? Can it be used to make pink Ruggiamo? Amy asked curiously. Well, in theory, yes, if there is really pink flour in the world. Meg nodded with a smile. I want to eat. Amy looked expectant. Is the focus on the flour? Barbara was a little angry at the two people who were so off-topic, but she still tried to control her emotions. She looked at Meg and said, Since you don't think my taste is good, what kind of clothes do you want me to wear? I think your taste is worse than mine. It's rare to find such a person in the world. Of course, it can't be me. Meg shook his head slightly. Mag looked at Barbara, who was about to retort, and continued, I will help you decide on the clothes. When the time comes, you can choose to wear your own clothes or the clothes that I custom-made for you. You can choose for yourself. If you don't have anywhere to go at noon, you can stay in the restaurant. But you'd better find a place to stay at night. The restaurant doesn't provide lodging. Then where will I stay? Barbara was confused. She hesitated for a moment and asked, Do you have a palace here? If this maiden had transmigrated to another place, Mag felt that in less than 3 minutes, the intelligence and common sense that she had exposed would be enough for others to devour her. After giving her a brief introduction to Chaos City, Meg asked Yarbemia to take her out for a walk, and if possible, find her a place to stay. Otherwise, it would be quite troublesome for her to stay at the restaurant at night. Father, I'm going out to play too. Amy also carried Ugly Duckling out. She also had some rest time at noon. I want to see how different this world is from the Moon Nation. Barbara took a deep breath before pushing open the restaurant's door. The vibrant autumn sun shone down on her, but it didn't make her feel dry. Instead, it was rather warm. She was greeted by the sight of a grand plaza. Doves of peace were eating insects on the grass, an elf with pointy ears was sitting on the grass reading a book, and a tall orc was carrying a little orc with a solemn expression. The little orc's sullen expression indicated that he had most likely been caught by his father again after doing something bad. Everything looked so special, and Barbara was quite unfamiliar with them. So these were the life forms of the continent. Even though they looked a little different from the residents of the Moon Nation, they weren't as grotesque as the teachers and books described them to be. The elf in the restaurant and the elf sitting on the grass were both so beautiful that she couldn't take her eyes off them. The orc was a little ugly, but the father and son didn't appear to be disgusting. Everything looked so harmonious, and Barbara's nervousness and anxiety eased significantly. This was completely different from the barbaric world that she had imagined. Barbara looked left and right. Suddenly, her eyes widened, and she exclaimed, Let go of that girl. Her. Yarbemia also looked in that direction with a confused expression. 1111 and Lulu just so happened to be walking out of the magic potion shop hand in hand with sweet smiles on their faces. She didn't know what they were talking about, but their hands were tightly clasped together, and it was as if nothing could separate them. MIA, Amy, and this young lady is? 1111 turned to Barbara with a smile. Lulu was looking at Barbara with a wary expression, and she tightened her grip on 1111's hand, hiding her behind her back. She could sense a hint of hostility from this young lady. Chapter 6:14. A hint of light appeared on Barbara's pink wand, and she pointed it in Lulu's direction. Lulu looked at Barbara with a wary expression. This little girl had come out of Amy's with Amy and the others, and she didn't appear to be an enemy, so for some reason, she was suddenly displaying hostility toward him. However, this little girl was very young, petite, and frail, and he felt like he could kill her with a single finger. As such, he didn't know how to deal with her, and could only stand in front of 1111 and observe the situation from afar. It's spatial magic, and it's of a very high level. Be careful. 1111 cautioned as she stood behind Lulu, and a wand had appeared in her hand. However, as soon as her voice trailed off, the tall and burly Lulu seemed to have been lifted into the air by a massive invisible hand. His feet were suspended in mid-air, and he immediately let go of 1111. At the same time, he threw a punch forward, and it easily pierced through the air barrier. However, the restraints binding his body were still there, and he was completely unable to break free. Thus, he was suspended in mid-air close to 2 meters in the air, unable to move up or down. The big dumb bear is flying. Big Sister Barbara is so awesome. Amy's eyes immediately lit up at the sight of Ugly Duckling's flight. Lulu. 1111 exclaimed as she looked at Barbara with wariness and hostility in her eyes. Little girl, why did you attack Lulu? That's right, Big Sister Barbara, Big Sister 1111, and the Big Dumb Bear are all very good friends of ours. Even though the Big Dumb Bear is a little dumb, he's actually a good person. Let him fly for a while before coming down. Amy also made her way over to Barbara with a perplexed look on her face. I feel like there's some sort of misunderstanding between the two of you. Or perhaps there's some sort of enmity between the two of you. Yarbemia said nervously. Due to her low combat strength, she was at a loss for what to do in a situation where a fight broke out at the slightest disagreement. In our Moon Nation, men are absolutely not allowed to hold women's hands in public. This is disrespectful to women and also a kind of blasphemy. It will bring bad luck to women. This guy is holding your hand in broad daylight, and you're still speaking up for him? That's ridiculous. Barbara looked at 1111 with an exasperated expression as if she were a concerned mother. 1111 faltered slightly upon hearing this. She put away her wand and chuckled as she said, "Little girl, we've been married for a long time, and we grew up together. It's very normal for us to hold hands, and it's an expression of our trust and love. I don't know where the Moon Nation you're talking about is, but in Chaos City, or in most places on the Norland continent, holding hands between husband and wife is not something that people would view as a scourge." That's right. If father held my hand to school, would you beat him to death as well? Amy asked with a curious look on her face. Is that so? Barbara turned to 1111 with a hesitant expression. She didn't appear to be forced to hold hands, and she was more concerned about the big man in the air. Meg pushed open the door and said to Barbara, "When in Rome, do as the Romans do. Only by respecting the culture and living habits of different places can you truly integrate into them. I hope you can remember this. This is a very normal thing to do here." Meg didn't really want to see this public display of affection. After all, he was also single, and 1111 and Lulu were a model couple who often displayed affection on a large scale, causing tons of harm to all of the other single people. However, to beat someone to death just because they were holding hands, that was a little too violent. Could it be that this girl had undergone FFF training before coming here? How could this be normal? How could a man and woman be together? Even if you two are in love, holding hands in front of others will still result in you being burned to death, Barbara said with a righteous expression. She didn't seem to acknowledge or yield to Meg's words in the slightest. Everyone looked at one another. Well, they were just holding hands and taking a stroll outside. They didn't do anything immoral. Even though you're single, you shouldn't have such thoughts. Meg didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Big Sister Barbara, your thoughts are very interesting. Also, I'm very good at lighting fires, Amy said happily. She extended her little hand, and a bluish-purple flame appeared in her palm. She looked at Lulu with an eager expression. That's right, women's rights should be defended by us. We can't let those stinky men take advantage of us, and we can't tolerate this kind of thing happening. Otherwise, We girls will end up hurting ourselves in the end. After getting Amy's approval, Barbara was even more confident. She looked at Lulu, who was floating in the air, and said in a judgmental tone, "Big stupid bear, because you've made an unforgivable mistake, I'm going to judge you now, tie you to a stake and burn you to death." Lulu still had a simple and honest smile on her face. Although she could feel the hostility of this little girl in front of her, since she was with Meg and the others, she couldn't do anything to her. She believed that Meg could handle this matter, so she turned her gaze to Meg. "I can't do anything about this matter. This already involves consciousness and cognition." Meg shrugged with a smile and said, "In situations like this, we usually just have to give her a good beating. I'm very touched by your words, little girl, but Lulu is very important to me. If you still insist on doing something, then we'll have to do something as well." 1111 looked at Barbara with a smile as her wand appeared in her hand. Lulu's smile also faded. Seeing as Meg wasn't going to do anything, then they had to resolve this matter themselves. 7th tier spatial magic was indeed quite powerful, but he was also only at the 7th tier. "I won't listen. I won't listen. I'm going to put this guy on a stake today and teach him the consequences of flirting with women." Barbara shook her head vigorously. She looked at the wand in 1111's hand, but she wasn't concerned in the slightest. This beautiful big sister didn't appear to be very powerful, so there was no need for her to be overly concerned. "Are they going to fight?" Amy stood off to the side with Ugly Duckling in her arms, and looked on with anticipation in her eyes. Roar. Chapter 6:15. What? What a huge bear. Barbara raised her head with her mouth agape. She was a little dazed. The massive bear was close to 3 meters tall, and its fur was extremely tough. Its sharp paws were a stark contrast to the petite Barbara. So it really is a bear. But how can a human turn into a bear? This world is so scary. I want to go back to the moon. Barbara's mind shuddered. This scene had completely upended her worldview. Furthermore, Lulu had been able to break through her air barrier with ease, and her powers had far exceeded her expectations. Now that she saw Xiong Feng standing there, looking like he could rush up and tear her to pieces at any time, she didn't dare to move for a moment. However, she still had to put on a brave face and not lose to him in terms of aura. "Are you still going to put her on the grill?" "It won't be difficult for her to tie you to the grill," Meg said with a smile. "Protecting a woman's dignity is a very serious and important matter. It's not something that can be stopped by power," Barbara emphasized with a serious expression. "Her man only loves her, that's a woman's dignity." 1111 put away her wand and made her way over to them with a smile. She looked at Barbara with a smile, and said, "What a beautiful little girl. Where did you come from? Why don't we be friends? What's so fun about fighting each other?" Barbara looked at the smile on 1111's face, and was suddenly struck by an urge to befriend her. Her serious expression eased slightly, and she looked at Lulu. She hesitated momentarily before putting away her wand, and clearing her throat as she said, "I'm not scared of you. I just don't want to fight on my first day here. It'll make people think that people from the Moon Nation only know how to fight." She's Barbara, the third waitress of the restaurant. She came from a faraway place, so please be more tolerant of her strange behavior in the future. Mag smiled at Barbara, who didn't seem to have any intention of continuing to attack. He then turned and made his way into the restaurant. "Barbara, what a lovely name, just like you." 1111 smiled sweetly and reached out to hold Barbara's hand. She said softly, "You must be not used to coming from a faraway place. It doesn't matter. We will be neighbors in the future. You can come to Sister 1111 if you need anything." Barbara looked at 1111. 1111's smile was so gentle, and her gentle tone reminded her of her mother. Her mother and father must be very worried that she had transmigrated here. She choked up a little. Although Sister 1111 is a good person, those stinky men who touch women in public must be burned to death, Barbara thought to herself as she watched 1111 and Lulu walk into the park hand in hand. "Let's go, Barbara. If you don't mind, you can stay next to me. The house there is a little small, But it's quite clean and quiet, Yarbemia said to Barbara as she led her away. I don't want to live in those strange places. Do you have a palace here? I want to live in a palace. Yarbemia returned to the restaurant with Barbara in the evening. She asked with a serious expression as soon as they entered. There's no king in Chaos City, so there's no palace. Meg shook his head. This girl was dreaming. Ah. Then what should I do? There's no crystal bed, no bathtub, no wardrobe, and even the toilet smells. How am I supposed to live in a place like this? And Anne, I saw a furry thing just now. What am I supposed to do if it comes out at night? Barbara became more and more aggrieved as she spoke. She pouted as if she was going to cry. It was a little mouse. I think it's quite cute, Yarbemia added softly. It's grey, furry, and has a pointy mouth and a long tail. How can something like that be worthy of the word cute? Barbara couldn't help but raise her voice a few octaves. Even if there's a wardrobe now, you don't have any clothes to hang in there. Mag rolled his eyes. However, it was understandable that a princess who had been living a life of luxury would find it hard to accept that she had to live a life of poverty all of a sudden. If you want a palace, we have one upstairs. Big Sister Barbara, why don't you stay upstairs? Our toilet smells really good. Remi, who had just returned from school, said with a smile. Really? Barbara's eyes immediately lit up. Boss, did you build a palace upstairs? Yarbemia also looked at Meg with curiosity and anticipation. She hadn't seen what a palace looked like yet. The restaurant doesn't provide accommodation, so Meg shook his head. However, before Meg had a chance to finish his sentence, Barbara had already run upstairs. Hee. Amy also ran upstairs with Ugly Duckling in her hand. Boss, can I go take a look? I haven't seen a palace yet. Yarbemia also looked at Meg with anticipation in her eyes. Go on. Meg raised a hand with a resigned expression. There was no palace upstairs, it was just a small amusement park. Let's go together, Aisha. Yarbemia dragged Sally upstairs with an elated expression. I have to think of a way to get this girl to move out. Just the thought of living with a stranger makes me uncomfortable. Meg thought to himself. He took a look at the time, and found that there was still some time before the restaurant opened for business. He thought to himself for a moment before also making his way upstairs. There weren't any extra rooms in the house anyway. Barbara would most likely be a little disappointed after seeing the amusement park, so he could just get MAA to find her a slightly better place to live. Wow. This is so fun. This horse can move on its own. Can I wear these shoes with wheels? Oi, help me up, I'm going to fall. Ouch. Before Meg had even reached the second floor, the joyful voices of the girls could already be heard coming from upstairs. The loudest one among them was none other than Barbara. Meg made his way over to the door, and Barbara was wearing a pair of ice skates, and was crawling up from the ground. She was rubbing her legs with an elated smile on her face. Sally and Yarbemia were sitting on either side of a seesaw, and even Sally had a vibrant smile on her face. Are you guys really that fun? Meg stood at the door with his mouth slightly agape. He found it difficult to accept what he was seeing. Chapter 6:16. Meg looked at the radiant smile on Barbara's face, and realized for the first time that she was rather adorable when she smiled. At least, she was much more adorable than the man who had just declared that he would burn the woman's hand to death. However, after thinking about it carefully, he realized that she was just a little princess who had been raised in a palace and was used to living a comfortable life. It was obviously not easy for her to quickly understand the habits of this world after transmigrating to this world. After all, not everyone in this world was ready to transmigrate at any time. Seeking common ground while reserving differences was the right attitude to look at problems. From another perspective, it was just like how he couldn't stand this world's attitude toward half-humans, and wanted to correct this mistake. However, this world's attitude toward half-humans was completely different. But there's no crystal bed for you to stay in here, Nor is there a super large wardrobe for you to store your clothes in. In fact, there's not even a wooden bed. Meg looked at Barbara and shook his head. As long as you let me stay here, I don't mind even if there's no bed. I really love this place. Barbara shook her head, and her face was still filled with excitement. No, I have connections. Meg still shook his head. I've never begged anyone in my entire life. Barbara's serious expression suddenly changed, and she pouted as she looked at Meg with a pitiful expression. But can I beg you this time to let me stay here? I'm even willing to sleep on the floor. Mag raised an eyebrow at the sight of Barbara's earnest expression. All of a sudden, she was no longer behaving like a domineering princess. Instead, she looked rather pitiful, and he was at a loss for what to do. Boss, Barbara really doesn't seem to like the place I'm staying in, and she's really afraid of rats. Why don't you let her stay here until she finds a suitable place to stay? Yarbemia said softly as she looked at Barbara sympathetically. Her heart ached when she saw the girl screaming and hiding in her arms. If she didn't go, then she would be like her, without a home or family. Yes, father. Let big sister Barbara stay here. That way, I can teach her the rules of our chaos city, and she won't get into fights with people on the streets. Amy also shook Meg's hand in a pleading manner. You haven't even learned it yourself, yet you want to teach others? Meg brushed Amy's nose with his finger and stared into Barbara's eyes for a while before nodding slightly and saying, I can agree to let you stay. Before Barbara could cheer, Meg continued, however, I won't provide you with anything to stay in. You can use the bathroom between 10 p.m. and 10:30 p.m., but you have to clean the bathroom after you use it. You can't leave a single strand of hair behind. You can only go upstairs when you want to sleep at night, and you can only move around in this room. Yarbemia and Sally both looked at Barbara with concern in their eyes. No problem. Barbara nodded without hesitation. She didn't even bat an eyelid. Also, you have to remember that this is not your moon nation. No one will treat you like a princess, so you have to abide by the rules of this world. If you continue to be unruly and get into trouble, I won't bear the consequences for you. Meg looked into Barbara's eyes with a serious expression, and said, everyone has to be responsible for their own actions. You're not a 3-year-old anymore. Barbara looked at Meg in silence for a while before nodding solemnly, and saying, I understand. I'll be responsible for my own actions. Then you can stay here, but this is only for the time being. Once you find a suitable place to stay, you'll have to move out. After all, this is not a palace, it's just Meg's playground. Meg nodded and turned around to go downstairs. Father, am I still a 3-year-old? Amy raised her hand and asked. Of course not. You're a 4-year-old, so you have to start taking responsibility for your own actions, Meg said with a smile as he stroked Amy's hair. Okay, I understand. Amy nodded thoughtfully. Then, she looked at Barbara with a happy expression, and said, That's great. Big sister Barbara, you can stay at my house now. Today, I'm going to teach you a lesson about holding hands. You can't do anything to my father. He'll hold my hand, but he's a good person. On a deserted island on the Demon Islands, a few black-robed figures with their faces obscured were squatting on the slope of a canyon, eating something. Master Seuss, we still can't get in touch with Chaos City. After the Black Falcons returned, they didn't receive the secret letter, so I'm afraid something must have happened over there. At this moment, a black-robed magic caster hurriedly rushed down the slope with a black falcon in his arms. The black-robed figures sitting on the slope all turned toward them with concerned looks in their eyes upon hearing that. Seuss looked up at the secret letter with a red lacquer seal tied to the black falcon's leg, and his brows furrowed tightly. The scar at the corner of his eyebrows became extremely prominent, and his dead fish eyes became even more sullen as he asked in a low voice, When did we lose contact with them? We received a report from them 3 days ago, so if something had happened, then it should have happened within the past 2 days, the black-robed magic caster quickly replied. Seuss fell silent again, but his brows furrowed even more tightly. According to the rules, the Black Falcons have to report to Master Seuss every other day. Could something have really happened to Narsun and the others? Narsun's team isn't very powerful, but they definitely aren't weak, either. Even if they encountered some kind of enemy, At least one or two of them should have been able to escape. How could they have disappeared without any news? Could it be that they encountered that person? That's impossible. Hasn't that person already been crippled? We've already searched through several islands, but we still haven't found any traces of them. The black-robed figures sitting on the slope discussed in low voices with grave expressions. Take a team to Chaos City and find out what the situation is like. Send a flying falcon to report back, Seuss instructed the black-robed magic caster. Yes. The black-robed magic caster nodded before quickly disappearing into the canyon with a 7-man team. Let's continue. After we finish searching this island today, there are only 3 islands left. That guy is most likely on one of those 3 islands. Seuss looked at the black-robed figures sitting on the slope, and said in a grim voice before leading the way into the dense forest. Yes. All of the black-robed figures hurriedly followed along. Chapter 617. Brandley walked around in a circle before turning to the man, and saying, "Find out if there have been any reports of missing persons in Chaos City in the past 2 days. If there aren't any, then there's no need to investigate this matter." But the man faltered. Brandley shook his head, and interjected, "Our Grey Temple is responsible for the safety and stability of the residents of Chaos City. Instead of wasting time on such trivial matters, why don't we spend more time on proper business?" Brandley shook his head, and turned to leave. The man turned to the Grey Temple employee who was conducting a thorough investigation, and said, "Take away all of the suspicious items, then get the City Lord's castle to cooperate with the investigation of the missing persons cases. Could it be that something is about to happen in Chaos City? So be it. Chaos City has never been peaceful anyway." Brandley murmured to himself as he shook his head before making his way over to the black horse-drawn carriage parked nearby. In the northern part of Chaos City, a horse-drawn carriage slowly passed through the city gate. "I don't know when I'll be able to come back to Chaos City again. Take care, Alex." Louis drew back the curtain of the carriage, and turned to look at the city gate tower before lowering the curtain again. The horse-drawn carriage continued onward, and soon disappeared on a straight road. On the northwestern border of the Roth Empire, there was a burly man in a suit of golden armor standing on the edge of a steep canyon. The dry winds blowing from the northwestern side of the canyon made his red cape flap loudly in the wind. "Your Highness, the cheaters still haven't been able to find any substantial contact with Alex. Perhaps he didn't leave Chaos City through the military," a young man in a black robe said in a quiet voice. "How many friends do you think Alex has, Quinn?" Sean was still looking at the other side of the canyon, where there was a stronghold constructed from giant black rocks. He could clearly see the orcs standing in front of the stronghold with a smile on his face. Quinn was silent for a moment before replying, "According to our investigations over the past few years, he almost doesn't have any friends. He only has some comrades and subordinates from the military, and his relationship with them is purely that of a superior and subordinate." Sean turned around and looked at Sean with a smile, and asked, "Since that's the case, who would do such a thing even though they know that it might bring about big trouble or even death? Apart from those soldiers who have experienced life and death on the battlefield, who would do such a thing?" Sean was silent for a while, then nodded and said, "Your Highness is right. But the cheaters have been tracking them for a long time, and they still haven't found anything. Should we expand the scope, or capture some of them for interrogation?" Fox stood in the middle of the palace, and seemed very small at this moment. "Fox, the Frost Dragon tribe has lost many powerful Frost warriors in this war, and the negotiation results you brought back did not give us any benefits at all. Now, you want to be the chief of the Frost Dragon tribe? I will be the first to disagree," an old man with short hair and a short beard said in a low voice. "Rankster's death has been confirmed, and the position of the chief of the Frost Dragon tribe has been vacant for 2 years. The people of the Frost Dragon tribe are disunited, and the other 5 tribes look down on us. It is imperative that we elect a new chief. Fox is Rankster's younger brother, and his ability and talent are not inferior to Rankster's. He will be able to break through to 10th tier soon, and is the most powerful person among the younger generation. Moreover, the negotiation this time was conducted by several tribes together. The result cannot be entirely blamed on Fox. Great Elder, I agree to let Fox be the chief of the Frost Dragon tribe, a bearded old man with a long beard said. An old man with a long beard said as he looked at the old man with a crown sitting in the middle. Is it something that can only be late for festivals? Barbara asked curiously. Consider it a celebration for Barbara. Meg smiled at Barbara and said, Congratulations on finding your first job. Yeah, congratulations, Barbara. You found a place to live, Yarbemia said with a smile. Thank you, big sister Barbara. Thanks to you, we can eat delicious food again. Amy was also very happy. Congratulations, Sally said with a smile. Me? You're welcome. No, I mean, thank you. Barbara's eyes widened as she looked at everyone with smiles on their faces. Her words were a little incoherent, and everyone burst into laughter. All right, thank you for your hard work today. Order whatever you want to eat. Mag couldn't help but chuckle. Barbara was a little squeamish, but her work ethic was very commendable. She had done a good job as Yarbemia's assistant tonight. At the very least, her service attitude toward the customers was quite good, and she had received the approval of the customers. I want to eat grilled fish. I haven't had any grilled fish today. Amy was the first to raise her hand. Meow tilde Ugly Duckling's eyes lit up, and it also began to meow. Ugly Duckling, you can't eat supper. You'll get fat if you eat supper. If you get fat. Amy looked down at Ugly Duckling with a dangerous expression. Meow. Ugly Duckling felt a chill run down its spine, and it immediately retracted its head, not daring to move. I want to eat Rugiamo. Yarbemia raised her hand. I want to eat a plate of Yangju fried rice, Sally said. I want to eat beef kebabs. Barbara swallowed her saliva. She had already lost count of how many times she had swallowed that night. Big sister Barbara, do you only eat beef kebabs? I don't think you eat anything else. Amy looked at Barbara with a perplexed expression. Mag was also looking at Barbara with a perplexed expression. Roast beef kebabs were indeed delicious, but it was rather strange for her to insist on choosing roast beef kebabs when there were so many other delicacies to choose from. I think beef kebabs are delicious, Barbara said with an uneasy expression. All right, you two sit here and wait for a while. I'll go make some delicious food for you. I'll make a big serving of grilled fish so everyone can have some. Meg turned and walked into the kitchen. Not long after that, Yarbemia and Sally went into the kitchen to help bring out one dish after another. Meg carefully carried out a large serving of grilled fish and placed it at the center of the table. He took off his apron as he said, Let's dig in. There's a lot of supper tonight. Is this all for me? Barbara looked at the small mountain of beef kebabs in front of her. There were more than 20 of them, and she looked at Meg with incredulity. That's right. Eat to your heart's content. Meg nodded with a smile. He picked up a piece of the most tender meat below the fish head with his chopsticks, and placed it in Amy's bowl. Ugly Duckling craned its neck to look at the grilled fish. It then looked up at Amy with an aggrieved expression, and covered its eyes with its little paws. What the eye doesn't see, the heart doesn't grieve over. Then, I'll help myself. Barbara was elated. 20 beef kebabs were enough to last her for over half a month. It appeared that this restaurant owner wasn't as bad as she had thought. She picked up a beef kebab and began to eat happily. Barbara, the Rugiamo is super delicious too. Yarbemia stood off to the side and took a bite of the Rugiamo in her hand with a blissful expression on her face. A golden dragon tail sprang out from under her dress and swept around on the ground. Chapter 619. Big Sister MIA is going to become a giant dragon in the future. When that time comes, we'll be able to ask her to fly us into the sky, Amy explained as if she had seen through Barbara's confusion. That's awesome. I've never seen a giant dragon before. Barbara's eyes lit up as she looked at Yarbemia with anticipation. Can I transform now? No, I don't think I'll ever become a giant dragon. I'm only a half-dragon. Yarbemia shook her head with a dejected expression. Barbara shook her head with a serious expression, and said, how could that be? Big Sister Emia is super awesome. She's able to remember all of the customers' orders without making a single mistake. Even a true giant dragon wouldn't be able to do that. You're much better than a giant dragon. That's right. You'll become a true giant dragon sooner or later. Meg also smiled. A joyful smile appeared on Yarbemia's face as she shook her head, and said, actually, I'm not sad at all. Even if I really become a giant dragon, I still want to be a waitress at the restaurant and serve the customers. I'll reward you with a beef kebab. Meg smiled as he placed a beef kebab onto Yarbemia's plate. This was a true exemplary employee. Thank you, boss. Yarbemia's smile became even more vibrant. The supper ended in a happy atmosphere. Sally cleaned the table and cutlery before preparing to leave with Yarbemia. This is your work uniform. Let's see if my taste is better than yours. Meg pulled out a black box from the counter and handed it to Barbara. Work uniform? Yarbemia made her way over curiously. Sally also looked over curiously. She wondered what kind of work uniform Meg was going to give to Barbara this time. I don't think there's anything wrong with my taste, so I'm not looking forward to it at all. Barbara emphasized in a serious manner. However, she still quickly placed the box on a clean table and slowly lifted the lid with her hands. Wow, a white and blue dress with beautiful lace. It looks so pretty. Yarbemia couldn't help but exclaim as she looked at the dress in the box. It's a dress. And there's a pair of beautiful little black shoes. Amy also stood on her tiptoes as she looked at the dress in the box. Boss is so awesome. He can design so many clothes. Does he have a tailor's room? Sally's eyes to look at Meg's to see how to make all kinds of things. Meg's eyes to look at the dress, to pull the dress, to lift, to look to tutu, to look to the dress. Barbara's eyes also lit up. She couldn't move her eyes away from the dress in the box. She reached out with both hands and gently lifted the dress up. The dress was beige in color. The lace at the collar, the lace at the front, and the small lace at the lotus leaf folds were pinkish blue. The cuffs and the satin belt at the waist were light blue. The dress was smooth and soft to the touch. The dress also had a tutu feel to it, and it looked very cute. It's so beautiful. It's so cute.